Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind remarks. I have to do this with the lights. This works a little bit difficult, but I'll do my best. It's an honor and a pleasure to make a few introductory remarks at this conference that celebrates a historical event in international relations. The American exhibit at Sokolniki Park was the result of the 1958 American-Soviet Cultural Agreement, an agreement that only a few years before would have seemed utterly impossible. Let us go back to 1953. Joseph Stalin died on the 5th of March. The Cold War was at its height. The United States government had information and cultural programs all over the world, but no program whatsoever in the Soviet Union, or indeed in any other Eastern European country. In September 1953, Nikita Khrushchev assumed power in the Soviet Union. I'm delighted that his son, Professor Sergei, is here with us today. Clearly, his father was interested in taking the Cold War out of the freezer. A little unknown copyrighted story. In my diplomatic career, I had something to do with the Austrian Treaty and also with Yugoslavia. When the Second World War ended in 1955, Austria was occupied by the four victorious powers: the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Four power talks to end the occupation and restore Austria as an independent country, an independence she lost when Nazi Germany incorporated Austria into Germany in 1938. Those four power treaty talks started in earnest in 1948, but went nowhere, because for 7 years the Soviets objected to an Austrian treaty. Yugoslavia had become a communist country under Marshal Tito at the end of World War II, but was expelled from the Comintern at Stalin's behest in June of 1948. Yugoslav-USSR, or better, Tito-Stalin relations hit rock bottom. After he became General Secretary, Khrushchev wanted to reverse that situation. In one of his actions, the Soviet Communist Party invited a Yugoslav party delegation to Moscow at Christmas time, 1954. In the course of a dinner, and I was told this by two participants, Khrushchev asked the Yugoslav delegation whether, in view of Yugoslavia's good relations with the United States, they had any recommendations for improving Soviet relations with the United States. One of the Yugoslav delegates replied, "How about finally agreeing to an Austrian treaty?" 5 weeks later, on February 8, 1955, the Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov gave a speech announcing the USSR intention to sign an Austrian treaty. It came as a complete surprise to all of us, including the Department of State. On May 15, 1955, an Austrian treaty was signed in Vienna. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov had cordial discussions that would have been inconceivable a few months earlier. Of course, the Cold War was still on, but with the conclusion of the Austrian Treaty, the atmosphere had changed. Ambassador Georgy Zarubin, who was a difficult and rather unapproachable negotiator during 7 years of Austrian treaty talks, appeared in 1975 as a congenial and approachable man during the negotiations of the American-Soviet Cultural Agreement. That agreement proposed, among other events, the exchange of exhibits, such as the one we are celebrating here today. Even before the agreement, the United States Information Agency started tentatively to foster US-USSR cultural relations. We tried to station cultural officers at the American Embassy in Moscow. The Soviets balked. No USIA officers in the USSR, they said. So we literally had to transfer USIA officers to the Department of State. But in contradistinction to the pre-Austrian treaty time, these officers were able to do their cultural work in Moscow, limited, to be sure. 2 of these officers are here with us today. Tom Tuck, who later in his career became one of the most senior and most respected USIA officers, and who was present when Vice President Nixon and General Secretary Khrushchev engaged in the famous kitchen debate in the American Pavilion at Sokolniki Park. And Yale Richmond, who went to Poland under similar circumstances and who served with great distinction, not only there, but also later in the Soviet Union. Both Tuck and Richmond are authors of excellent books on public diplomacy. As I said, by 1957, American-Russian relations had climbed from the freezer to the refrigerator. And the US and the USSR decided to put cultural relations between the 2 countries on a legally recognized basis. The cultural agreement, the American delegation chief was Ambassador William Lacey, and the Soviet delegation chief was Ambassador Georgy Zarubin, was signed within 3 months on January 27, 1958. It not only dealt with exchange of exhibits, but with several other cultural, technical, and educational exchanges. It was a unique agreement, for it provided American direct access to the Russian people, something the Soviets had tried to avoid under all circumstances. Now suddenly, the Soviet government agreed to events which brought Americans in direct contact with Russians and other Soviet nationalities. This historic agreement was followed by several other US-USSR bilateral treaties, including disarmament agreements, all of which led to taking the US-Soviet relationship out of the refrigerator. The American exhibit at Sokolniki Park was the first major event on the long road out of the Cold War. In conclusion, let me congratulate Sean Aday and Mark Taplin for their extraordinary efforts to putting this conference together. And let me wish all of you a successful and pleasant day. Thank you very much.